Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Spark event up close and personal. My name is Rachel Calloway, and as you probably know, I serve as the director of Spark, Carolina's Music Leadership Laboratory here at the University of South Carolina. In addition to my role as the director of Spark, I'm also an instructor of voice at the School of Music and have a lively career as a soloist and chamber musician in a variety of vocal music. And I'm delighted to be joined here by my close colleague and friend, Jeff Vaughn. Jeff, would you introduce yourself and say hi to everyone?
Hello, my name is Jeff Vaughn. I serve as the Assistant Director of Spark. I've been there since 2016. I'm a percussionist, percussion teacher, rhythm event facilitator, and get to work with folks all throughout the Carolinas.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jeff. Today, we're going to be discussing ideas around networking and friendraising. And we have this wonderful online format tonight where we're going to be engaging with some terrific guests via Zoom. We're excited to share them with you. There are three distinguished School of Music alumni, each with their own very interesting and personal approaches to networking and friendraising. And first, I'd like to introduce George Fetner. George graduated in 2008 with a Bachelor's of Music and Composition and 2015 with a Master's in Composition, and was a member of the Guitar Studio during his time at the School of Music. His master's thesis was titled Echoes for Unity for Wind Ensemble, and he's a staple of the local music scene here in Columbia as a guitarist and a songwriter and band leader. George, would you say hi to everyone and let us know what you've been up to these days?
Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me today. I'm here in Columbia, and I just released a new album with my rock band, which is George Fetner and the Strays, and it's a big band with horns and brass and keyboards and guitars and just about a 9-piece ensemble. And I'm just starting a new commission with the Columbia Museum of Art to write a concert-length piece, which will probably end up being an electroacoustic piece that'll hopefully be out next year in 2021. So that's what I'm up to these days.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, George. Next, we have Dr. Lauren Vaughn, and Lauren is a 2016 DMA graduate of the Flute Studio with a research focus on creating community-based performances within applied studios in higher education. She also holds degrees from the University of Southern California. We won't hold that against you, Dr. Vaughn, the other USC, and the Ohio State University. And she's a teacher and performer and music admissions and recruitment professional. Welcome, Lauren. Would you say hi and tell us what you've been doing these days?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So currently I also play second flute with the Augusta Symphony and principal flute with the Aiken Symphony, as well as freelancing with a number of different orchestras around the state. And I work at Newberry College. This is my 6th year working there. I teach flute. I teach a number of different classes in the music department and also serve as the music admissions and recruiting coordinator for the college. And I am originally from South Carolina, actually born and raised here. So it was great to come back after being away for a number of years. And now this is my 8th year living back in Columbia and in South Carolina. So happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for joining us. And our third guest this evening is Dr. Sheldon Johnson. Sheldon graduated in 2017 as a member of the Saxophone Studio, and his research focuses on saxophone pedagogy in light of its political suppression. He also holds degrees from Bowling Green State University and Northwestern University. Sheldon, would you say hello to everyone and tell us what you've been up to?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Sheldon Johnson. I'm currently based in Roanoke, Virginia, which is in the southwestern part of the state. I teach saxophone at Radford University. In healthier times, I also do some work with the Roanoke Symphony Orchestra, doing clinics in local schools. I do a summer saxophone intensive program with them, and then I play in the orchestra, when they need saxophone. I also teach at the Virginia Summer Governor School for the Visual and Performing Arts. I have a private studio as well, and I guess most recently I play in the Carolina Saxophone Quartet with Dr. Lehman at South Carolina, and 2 of his other DMA students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheldon. We're really delighted you're here. I'd like to start off our conversation tonight with a question for each of our 3 guests. And that question is, what does networking mean to you? If we could please start with George and then follow with Lauren and then Sheldon.
Yeah, so networking can sound like a very sort of straight-laced kind of businessy thing, but really it's just about getting to know the people that are around you in your scene and sharing how you can work together. That's how I see networking.
Great. What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, I agree with that, George. I think of networking, from my perspective, I'm coming at it from a very local and regional sense, and that the network that I'm building is helping my career grow both locally but also regionally. And I think of networking as building my community, so a community of colleagues, but also a community of supporters, of friends, of fans, just anyone that you can rely on, but also knows that they can rely on you.
Wow, that's great. Thanks. How about you, Sheldon?
Yeah, I think for me, kind of like George says, it's kind of a stuffy sounding word, and I've always kind of thought of it a bit more formally or less formally. But I just think of it as like the community that kind of keeps the artistic scene going in your area, and that can be locally, regionally, or nationally. But I think it's also think of institutions as well that can like be beneficial, especially as you're trying to kind of jumpstart or build your reputation and as well as your career.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Jeff, want to take us to the next question?
Yeah, so the next question is for Lauren. So Lauren, how and when did you start to think about networking as its own thing? And, what do you think about the topic now that you're teaching college students who obviously networking is something that is important to them as well?
Yeah, so like most everyone, I think networking is a word that has been around for a long time. People talk about it, you have different conversations about it. But I don't think I really understood kind of what it really meant for musicians actually until I was living in Los Angeles. And in that environment where I was still a student, it was the first time that I actually had colleagues and friends who were around my age who had graduated and were no longer students and were actually working teachers and gigging musicians. And it really started to hit me what it was that they did to help build that career and kind of jumpstart what they were doing in that particular city. So I guess I started to become more aware of what it meant to network. And I had these great examples of colleagues who were, like I said, around my age and doing this to kind of look up to. And now that I'm working with college students, this is still a topic I'm thinking about very regularly. But for my college students, I try and encourage them to think of networking as pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. For a lot of people, it can be a little uncomfortable, I think, to start these conversations or to put yourself out there and be vulnerable, just like anything. But if they want to really start to grow their network, they have to look outside of that comfort zone and look past any initial fears that they might have and learn that repetition is very important. Like anything we practice, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And yeah, so I think that they start by looking within what they're doing in their current setting. So if they're in school, how are their classmates viewing them? Are they viewing them as hardworking and reliable and outstanding musicians? Because that's really where the kind of conversation can start, is in that really immediate network while you're in school.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. I love thinking about where we are now and how we can, begin with where we are now and not only look to what's going to be happening to us professionally in the future. I think that's really important for students and faculty and staff alike at these various institutions. I appreciate that. George, you took some time between your degrees, and I'm curious, by the time you finished your second degree at the University of South Carolina, did your idea or concept of networking change from when you began? And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about that journey for yourself.
Yeah, so it did change when I was an undergrad, and again, my background was really in composition. So as an undergrad, all of my networking was really based on a very simple problem. I needed people to play my pieces that I wrote. And so that really gave me sort of my first talking point. Hey, I've heard you perform before, or I know that you have an ensemble that you play with, and this is really talking to other undergrads. And are you open to new pieces? Do you want to work together? So that was really much more about discovery. It was much more about, I've never written for a string quartet, or I've never written for a brass quintet. So let's do this together and kind of do something together that we maybe haven't done before. Um, by the time I finished my graduate degree, it was still that same idea of discovery, but much more of an emphasis was on, I feel more confident about my work, and I feel more confident about approaching performers who I feel like are leaps and bounds beyond my personal skill level. So I felt more confident approaching people that I admired, who maybe weren't students. And there was also in my graduate studies more of a focus on, let's get a project together, and then where can we take this? Can we take this outside of the concert hall? Can we perform at a place across town? Can we get paid somehow? Can we start adding some other ingredients besides just the pure sort of discovery of making music with your friends? So I think in graduate school, there's a little bit more, can be more of that focus on, let's look towards your career and start to think about what we can do now to lay that foundation for more kind of career building aspect.
Thanks. If I could just follow up, George, for a quick second. Do you feel like that is something that happened for you just because of the comfort level that you had then with yourself as a musician and as a professional and as an artist? Do we feel like that's something that in your experience just developed as you gained that experience and confidence? Or do you feel like there's just more of a shift? Now I'm in my master's degree. I have to really like figure out how I'm going to make this thing viable beyond just my own artistic fulfillment, which of course is certainly valuable in its own.
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of both. Certainly for me, that confidence building, every time I worked with a new musician or a group of musicians, went through the whole process of writing the piece, rehearsing, performing, editing, maybe recording, that just builds confidence. But the other aspect that's really great about graduate school is you meet a lot of different people who have listened to a lot of different kinds of music and have different expertise. So in graduate school, I met some people who were very well versed in computer music, for example, and that was something that I was interested in, but hadn't met a lot of people at my undergrad, during my undergrad years, who were interested in that. So I think you become more confident, hopefully, but then you meet other people who've got some interesting ideas that maybe you latch onto as well. So I felt like in my graduate studies, there was more of that sense of, I've got a crazy idea. Let's get together and think about how we can make this work.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I like that idea of the exchange of ideas as part of the networking, because I think, as Lauren said earlier, we sometimes view that word networking as a lot of just looking outward, and it feels maybe like the energy only goes one way. But as you just described, it really is an exchange between people and artists. So that's really great. Thanks for sharing that. Sheldon, I'm curious, has your perception of networking changed since graduating? I know you mentioned you perform in the sax quartet with Dr. Lehman and some other graduates from the School of Music, and I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on the importance of maintaining your network. Here you are, living and working in another state and still collaborating with your former teacher and colleagues from U of SC.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't say that as a student I had like a really fully formed concept of what I thought networking was, but I think compared to like whatever sense of it that I had, it has certainly evolved. And I guess I tend to think of it, and by necessity, if nothing else, as additive. So like you have this networks that you've created over the years, and then you got to at least hold on to that while also trying to stretch yourself further over here. So yeah, it's been really great to kind of stay connected and reconnect with folks in South Carolina, and then moving away. Um, my sense of networking, I think, is kind of augmented. So it's no longer just classmates and fellow instrumentalists, whether saxophonists or people I go to school with. As a student, I was often that person that someone like George would come to and say, "I've heard you play, and I've got this piece," and there was kind of baked into the cake this like performance opportunity. Now that I'm not a student, I have to search a little more. So for me, it's been really important to, and things that I wasn't able to do necessarily as a student, but to really get to know and develop relationships with like the local middle and high school band directors. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, but it's really important. The personnel manager for orchestra and booking agents and that kind of thing. So kind of looking to folks and asking who's the next person I need to get to know in order to kind of keep this thing going. So yeah, it's great, and you can think of it as one big network, or I have multiple networks. One here, the one with the guys in South Carolina. I still have connections with folks that I went to school elsewhere with. We're apart now, but may come back together and collaborate in the future. So I think just having many pots from which to pull is really helpful.
And Sheldon, if I might add, so you currently work in Virginia, and I think you're originally from the state as well. But you finish your term. You've moved all over the country for your degrees, and you finish your terminal degree down here. And so I really think that you represent a special case of connecting old networks and sustaining those with rebuilding networks that maybe were there before you kind of participated in them. Being from Virginia, obviously a scene existed there. So I'm wondering, specifically, like how might a student who's graduating and getting ready to go into a network and who may be like so focused on building a new network, what advice would you give to them to make sure that they don't overlook the network that they currently have or the networks they've built at their other institutions?
Yeah, it's everything's its own special case. Like I do happen to be from Virginia, and I'm back here. Like I live like 30 minutes from where I grew up. And it's strange as it may be, it's probably the hardest time I've had breaking into a music scene, because the people who, there's certainly people that were here before and have gone on. They're people that I remember, but I was always like a young high school kid to them. So now, being a colleague has been an interesting transition. So, even though it was an existing network, I couldn't take it for granted. So I think that goes to the maintenance piece that we're talking about. And so, not being able to rely on a mentor, someone like Dr. Lehman who can vouch for you with the, SC Phil, say, yeah, you can play. And now I have to be like, yeah, I can play, and let them know, send out CVs, sometimes unsolicited. So, I'd say just like, don't take anything for granted. Look to already extant networks if that might be beneficial. I think the last thing I'll say too is don't despair if it doesn't happen right away. Because I know for me, like this is my 5th year back, and now I'm really starting to feel like people know who I am, and I'm people's first call for a lot of things. But it didn't just start that way. It took a while. It took it to build trust, and it's gone well, and I hope it continues to go well. But just don't be too upset if things don't happen overnight.
Thanks so much for that, Sheldon. I like what you said about how it takes time. This is my 5th year also in South Carolina, and my husband and I moved here to work at the university, and we left a place where everybody knew us, and then we came somewhere, and now I still think I'm the new person, but I'm not. There are much newer people, but it takes some time really to sort of get your name out there and make those connections. And I always say, let people know that you're looking for work, that you're looking for students, concerts, whatever it might be. And then it takes a little time for those seeds to germinate. And then the opportunities start to develop. So I really appreciate that. I think they say it takes 5 or 10 years to become established in a new city. I forget what that's really about. So thanks for that. I'm going to look at everybody now, and I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many of you would consider yourselves shy or introverted? Oh, wow. Okay. 3 out of 5. George and I are the outliers. Lauren, would you mind taking us through this next question? You know, I'm asked sometimes by students or friends, you know, I'm so awkward. You know, I'm the person, I go to a wedding and like I can't, right now we're not going many places, let's be real. But when we did, and when we do again, you know, I feel so awkward at this thing where I know I'm supposed to talk to people, or how do I talk to people after a concert, or, you know, I'm going to as many shows as I can, but I feel like I'm having a hard time making those connections. I'm just a shy person, or I'm an introverted person, or I have social anxiety, or whatever it might be. And I'm curious if you could just share some ideas you might have for folks who feel that those fears really impede their ability to start these connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people who know me well wouldn't say I'm necessarily shy, but I definitely feel like I like to talk to people, but I like to talk to people that I'm comfortable talking with. So I'm not necessarily one that's just going to go out on a limb and try to make a connection with someone that I don't have much in common with or don't know much about yet. But as I was going through school and I was realizing this about myself, that I wasn't the one that was really putting myself out there and just, you know, calling people and signing up for gigs and all this stuff, I started to look to my friends who were good at that. And there are a couple distinct memories I have of a particular student I did a flutist I did my master's degree with, who I would say has a fantastic network of flute players and musicians. Like everyone I meet, we know the same person. And she told me once that she makes it a point to go into an orchestra rehearsal where she might know one person, and she just starts introducing herself to people. And that, I was like, oh no, I would never do that. But it gave me something to be like, okay, well, that's something I've never thought about before. You know, I show up and sit in my chair and do my thing and hope that nobody like yells at me, I guess. But that was something. So I started to look for people who were very good at networking. And at this point, I was living in Los Angeles, where you have to put yourself out there and be good at networking. And it takes at least 10 years to break into the scene. But I also realized that maybe that's where I didn't want to spend my career, because I wasn't one of those people that was really going to go out on a limb like that. So I find a lot of comfort in the area that I'm in now, where coming back to South Carolina, it was a place that was more familiar, that was more comfortable, that I already knew some people, and could kind of get things going there in a very organic way that was more true to who I am and who I want to represent. But, you know, I think that talking with people and introducing yourself to people, it's a skill. It's something that you have to try a lot of different ways. I think in this era, I'm very lucky that we communicate a lot through email and text, because I can draft an email 10 different times before I send it out there. I'm not necessarily, you know, giving my first impression always by meeting someone in person, where I might be a little bit more reserved. So I'd say for people who know that they aren't necessarily the most outgoing when you're in an unfamiliar place, consider reaching out and building your network through email, through social media, through texting, a platform that you are comfortable with, and you can craft your message in a certain way, and then hope that over time you start to become more comfortable in your network to where you will feel comfortable calling people and asking for things or putting your name out there for different things.
Thanks for that. I really like how you talked about sort of practicing, you know. I think that as students, especially in young professionals, we're just really focused on practicing our music making or our composing or whatever it is that we're pursuing artistically. And yet all these other skills are skills that we practice too. And I know for myself, when I first took an interview at like an institution, I'd never done anything like that. And though I'm more comfortable talking to strangers, I had to practice my interview questions, even though I didn't know what they would be. And I know when we have, even in Spark, developed some of our online content, and I thought, well, how am I going to talk in a Zoom room of 60 people that don't know me? How am I going to fill those awkward silences? And it's amazing how many resources there really are online to just gather some questions, get some starting questions, learn how to start conversations. And and at least have a few things in our pockets for when we find ourselves in those situations. We're not always, starting from scratch in that moment when we feel a little bit nervous. So I think that's really apt. And kind of building on that, Lauren, now technology is just such a part of everything that we do. I literally now more than ever, but even before the pandemic, I mean, we're just engaging with so much more online than we used to. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how the development and sort of like advancement of technology or just the changes in technology in these last years have impacted the way that you communicate with different people, and if you have any thoughts on how the etiquette in networking and connecting has changed over this time.
Yeah, absolutely. We live in an era where people want things to be pretty instant. So being able to respond quickly, I think, is really important. I learned that firsthand when I was a graduate student, right around the time everyone was getting smartphones and I didn't have one, so I was checking my email on my computer. And in Los Angeles, they would need a flute player for something. They'd send out an email to 15 people, and the first one that responded got the gig. And I kept missing out on these opportunities. And I was like, okay, I've got to get a smartphone, I guess. And that was my first iPhone. And that's when, I just became much more aware of that instant need to respond. Something I'm not so great at is social media, and in a professional, like promotional sense, I know there are a lot of people out there who communicate a lot through social media and find collaborators and do a lot of really interesting projects with people around the world. And that's something that's not necessarily in my wheelhouse and not something I necessarily seek out to do. So I just want to say that it's okay if that is not you, that you will still find collaborators and you will still find really great projects to work on, even if because I know I always felt when I was a student that I had to be really present on social media, and that the way I was putting myself out there on social media was really important. And it is, but it's not everything. And I have no idea what the future is going to hold with technology. I do have a colleague who I called her, and her voicemail says, sorry, I can't answer the phone, but if you need something right away, please send me a text message. And that was the first time I had experienced that. But I think it's really smart if you're playing a lot and teaching a lot. Sometimes it's easier to respond to a text message quicker than it is to return a phone call. So I think that's a really interesting way to approach this need for kind of instant response for different opportunities that you might miss otherwise. But yeah, so I just try to focus on the fact that in addition to technology, networking is ultimately about building connections. And so I try to really focus on that community and connection and the interpersonal relationships just as much as my use of technology in kind of building those relationships.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Jeff, I wonder if I could direct the next question to you. When we named this event, Up Close and Personal Network and Friendraising, was a word that you threw out there, and I'm going to admit that that's a word that I was not really familiar with until you introduced it to me. So I wonder if you could share with all of our guests and viewers what that term means.
Yes. So I think everyone, as a starting point, we can say fundraising, and everyone understands that, right? We're raising money, we're raising funds, we're collecting funds, ideally as musicians, to be able to do something. And through all of my work with music entrepreneurship, that's important, right? It takes money to do things that can then make more money. But in working with actually local folks who work with community organizations throughout the town, I started hearing maybe 4 years ago or so, my colleagues started to use the word fundraising. And the first time I heard that kind of caught me off guard, and I didn't really understand what it meant. And as we spoke about it, I kind of like, yeah, people are important, right? And so the idea of friendraising is, yes, building a team, building support, building a network is important. But in terms of like, well, how does an organization deal with that? Networking, we tend to think of on an individual basis. I'm a person, I need to network. But if I'm a business or a band or a brand or the library in town, I still need to build friends around the community and to build that support system. And, quite frankly, I think fundraising and friend raising are really intertwined in many instances, right? A lot of times your support can actually help you fund projects, or even just financially just be more involved. And so I'd actually like to see what George has to talk about the topic in a second, but I just want to read something. So if y'all don't know, George is super famous around town, and his band GFATS was just featured in the state. And as I was preparing for this chat, and even just the concept of friend raising, George was asked a question and he responded. So I'm just going to read the question and his response, and then I'll let him respond about the response, if you don't mind, George. So it says, Longer Like This, which is the title of the album, came to be in large part thanks to a fan-led fundraiser on Kickstarter. Did that production support influence song selection or overall music composition of the album? And George, I was just really taken back by the way you answered this. It definitely contributed to the vibe of it. But honestly, when you do something like that, you're raising money to offset the cost. But what you end up with is this really amazing, supportive, close-knit community of friends and fans and family who are really excited to back you. That part of it really made it special for us. And so, George, maybe if you can just talk a little bit about your thinking here of why that aspect of it is so important to you, just broadly, but maybe even also for this project.
Sure. Well, thanks for the compliments. And yeah, I think when I think about the differences between fundraising traditionally and this concept of friend raising, it all goes back again to my undergraduate days, which was the most important thing. The reason why I was there to get a degree was to make better music and to become a better musician. And so I've always tried, for my baseline reason, in any project that I do, to, at the end of the day, if no one comes to your concert, or if at the end of the day you don't raise any money, you still have a group of people that all agreed to perform together and that got something out of it, right? So really the basic idea of why we as artists make music together, that really drives my decision making. And what it also does is it sets up sort of an accountability for me, so that if maybe the fundraising part of it doesn't go the way that I wanted it to, there is an accountability to myself and to other performers that says, let's examine why this didn't work, how we thought maybe it was going to work. I'll give you an example. So I also run a smaller kind of concert series called Wired Music, where we play new kind of classical music in bars and coffee shops around town. And there have been some times where we've had a great audience, or a time where we partnered with an institution in town and we were able to make some money. And then other times where we had a couple people show up and we had to kind of, examine why we didn't have a bigger audience, even though we put so much time and energy into it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think if you go into a situation and you all have a common, you're all agreeing on a common core reason why you're doing it, that doesn't have to rely on making, $100 at the end of the day or $200 at the end of the day, that can sometimes really make your event or your ensemble a lot stronger. And it can build a community that really influences how you move on later. And then just to make that point about the quote, we raised money to offset the cost of the production of the album. And that was awesome. I mean, that was really great. It meant that we didn't have to spend as much of our own money making this album, but sort of an unintended consequence was that we had more people that we knew cared about the project. And we had more people who we felt more confident. We felt more grateful that we had people who actually were willing to say, I'm going to put my money towards this because I believe in your project. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think if you start something or a collaboration or start a project, I think you have to have both goals in mind, and you can't let one really completely take over the other, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that, George. Absolutely. I think you're also getting at this idea of sustainability when we think about these kind of long-term projects. Putting together an album, it takes that's a long trajectory, or completing a college degree, or establishing oneself in a new city and trying to win some auditions, or get hooked up with some whatever gigs of any kind. It's a long road. And I think when we have this sort of community, as Lauren mentioned, around us, and friends and support around us, that just gives us that sustainable sort of strength or endurance for the long race, rather than just the short game of $100, on Thursday night. Not that anybody is ever mad at $100 on Thursday night. So thanks for sharing that. Before we finish tonight, I'd love to ask each of you for just one final thought, or piece of advice, or I don't know, little tiny piece of wisdom that you could share with our students in particular. And it could be related to these ideas of networking and friend raising, or something else that you feel really has helped you on your journey. If we could start with Sheldon, and then we'll follow with George, and then Lauren.
So I think like when making the transition from student to professional or just post-student, just thinking about and trying to anticipate the ways your life will be different. And I know oftentimes, like especially like between my master's and doctorate, the like lack of institutional support. So looking for ways to replace that or cobble something together that benefits you in a similar way is often really helpful. And then just kind of the last thing I want to say about networking specifically is, this whole concept exists, I think, for the set of fairly predictable opportunities that can come along with meeting the right people and making the right connections. But I can't count the number of times I've been surprised in the kinds of connections and opportunities that arise that you just can't predict. So just always be open. I mean, it's kind of a cliche thing to say. It's almost impossible to do, but just try to always maintain an openness to something that can come along that you weren't not only not expecting, but that maybe you weren't ready, but to try to maybe say yes if at all possible.
So I'm gonna sort of piggyback off of what Sheldon just said in terms of being open, and especially if directed towards undergrads. And this is just a philosophy that I try to still live by in terms of how I listen to music and learn about music. Don't limit yourself to what you learn in class or what your professor is going to teach you in your private lessons. You're going to learn a lot of information in both of those settings, but listen to things that you're not being taught in school. So that's the first thing. And what goes with that is anything that you hear, any genre of music or style of music, or if you go see a performance and it's music that you don't like, I challenge you to investigate that and get to a point where at least you can understand more about that style or genre, so that, if you still don't like it, you can still understand it a little bit better and maybe have more respect for it. Even if at the end of the day, it's not going to be something you're going to pop into your, now I'm showing my age, pop into your stereo, that you're not going to look up on Spotify or whatever to listen to. But anything that you don't like, investigate and try to find out why you don't like it, and try to find out if it's 99% of the time, it's just going to be because of your own kind of biased opinions of what music is. And 99% of the time, you'll come out of it learning more about music, and it's going to take you into so many other rabbit holes. So yeah, be open and investigate music you don't like and try to find out why.
Awesome. So I think my little closing thought comes from some realizations I had when I was first really making that transition from student to kind of professional, starting getting gigs and teaching more. And I quickly realized that being a good flutist in my case is absolutely necessary. You know, working hard, practicing hard, learning a lot of different music, putting yourself in a lot of different situations so you can learn how to deal with that is extremely important. But I think equally important is being a good colleague and being a good friend. And something I've learned in the professional world and playing with different orchestras all over the state is that I really like playing with groups who I have a lot of friends in the orchestra. And I think everyone who's even been in that group for 20 years, the people that they're calling for subs are fantastic players, yes, but they're people that they want to hang out with and spend time with. And that's something that really wasn't necessarily impressed upon me as a young student. It took me a long time to kind of realize that. And so that's kind of my word of wisdom that I offer students now, is that being a good colleague and being a good friend is equally as important as being a fantastic musician.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think we all agree one of the best parts about having a life in music is the people that we get to meet, the people we get to learn from, create with, engage with. And I couldn't agree more with what you said, Lauren. It's certainly one of the things that keeps me going and in this profession, and now more than ever to be able to connect with our friends, I think, in a professional sense as well as our personal lives. It really is what keeps us all going. So thank you for that. Before we close tonight, I just want to say thank you so much, Lauren and George and Sheldon, for joining us. Your expertise and individual experiences are just completely invaluable for our community here at the School of Music. And as I said at the outset, it's really wonderful for us to be able to talk to, you know, the success stories of the School of Music, people who are out there doing it, making it happen. And we really appreciate your time. I also want to say a special thanks to my colleague, Jeff Vaughn, for helping to organize this event and bring together this amazing group of people. Students, anybody who has any questions for our guests and wants to get in touch with them, you can reach out to us at the Spark Laboratory. That's spark@mozart.sc.edu, and we'll be able to direct you and put you in touch with these wonderful artists and musicians. And thank you again. We hope we'll all just continue to learn from each other about how we can connect in our musical lives and our professional lives, as well as our personal ones. Thank you again, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, be well. And here's looking forward to those times when we'll be all making music together in giant groups and small groups, again, without any concerns. And until then, it's conversations like this that sustain us. So thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.